Are you trying to jump ship from VMware? Maybe you're turned off from the Broadcom purchase, or you just don't want to pay the expensive and elaborate licensing fees each year. As we know by now, Azure Stack HCI is a great landing zone for all of those workloads. Problem though is getting the workloads from VMware over to HCI can be a bit of a hassle. So in this video, we're going to demonstrate how you can use Metallic as the middleman for that migration process. Stay tuned. All right, so you're ready for the big move. Maybe you have workloads, or maybe you have a client that has workloads that live in VMware, and you need to get them off of VMware into Azure Stack HCI. As you know, that's a bit of a hassle because there aren't a lot of tools out there that can actually do that conversion from one hypervisor type to another. Plus, there's a lot of hassle with generational types with Hyper-V. A lot of older tools convert the VMs as Gen 1 VMs once you import them, which you're going to be missing out on a lot of cool benefits like secure boot and all the things that Microsoft has been introducing into HCI and newer versions of Hyper-V for the past decade. So Metallic, which is the SaaS-based version of Commvault, in other words, it's a cloud-hosted version, has the ability to do this, and it does it very well. The caveat with all of these tools, though, that may exist, whether it's Metallic or using the older conversion utilities I described before, is the fact that you can't really do a migration live. Like, there's no way for the hypervisor in VMware ESXi to be aware of some kind of data transfer over to Hyper-V or Azure Stack HCI, synchronize the memory, yada yada. So no matter what happens here, that migration is going to have to be what we call offline. There will be downtime, and there's nothing you can do to avoid that. But what you can do is reduce the amount of downtime by using a tool that more or less just mitigates that gap as much as possible. So this is where Metallic comes in. Metallic, like I mentioned earlier, SaaS-based product. You're going to need to sign up for a trial. You can do that at www.metallic.io. There's no credit card, no billing information, none of that nonsense for the trial purpose. You just need to give an email address, and you are able to create a tenant account that kind of encompasses your company. I'll kind of skip those steps for the sake of time and brevity. No one really wants to see me clicking through and signing up for a trial, but it is a pretty straightforward process. Once you're signed up, then you just need to configure some basic infrastructure. You probably already have vCenter configured, which is a requirement. You can't just do this migration with just a standalone ESXi host. You will need vCenter. You will also need to have some kind of Windows server to host what's called a gateway service. You can think of it like a proxy. In traditional Commvault terms, it's called a media agent. But basically, it is a Windows server that is running on-prem that has line of sight to your VMware vCenter server, and also line of sight to your hypervisor, your Azure Stack HCI hypervisor servers. This is the thing that mediates between the cloud. It receives the backup job information. It also can be the thing that the backup data is saved to. Cool thing about Metallic is you don't need to actually put the data in the cloud and worry about internet speeds or anything like that. You can actually leverage on-premises storage locations, whether it's, like I just mentioned, the aforementioned gateway itself, or you can configure anything else. It could be an SMB share that's mounted to that gateway. There's dozens of different options. For the sake of this video, we're just going to be using a local storage, like a 500 gig hard drive, just to be the temporary dump zone for these VM backups. And that's the third piece to all of this. I want to make sure I clarify that this whole process is really just doing a backup and restore of VMs. The magic juju, though, is the fact that Metallic can do the conversion between VMware and Hyper-V, in this case, Azure Stack HCI. So we're kind of combining a bunch of things here. This is a manual process. You will need to kick off the backups and time and coordinate them. And then you'll need to also manually kick off the restores. There's no like magic button that just does it all. But again, during a migration like this, you probably don't want to do it big bang. Or if you do want to do it big bang, you're going to be okay with that outage window being for hours based on how fast your internet speed can be. All right, enough of me talking. Let's jump in. Let's see what it looks like and trial it out. So the first and the most obvious thing you have to do is sign up for a trial at the Metallic website. So once you've made your account, made your tenant, you're going to go to new configuration at the hub and you're going to pick a hypervisor. Whether it's VMware or Hyper-V, doesn't really matter. Both will prompt you with this modal saying to request a trial. It'll make a subscription, and then you'll be redirected into the actual Command Center web UI where you can configure your first hypervisor. Depending on which one you clicked, in this case, I'm just going to manually add a hypervisor, and I'm going to start with Hyper-V first. Hyper-V, even though it's Azure Stack HCI, it's still using the underlying same technology. Click through the GUI, and you're going to see you don't have a backup gateway configured. While this is downloading, you want to make sure you have enough storage on whatever Windows server that gateway is going to be installed to, so your backup data can actually live there. So in this case, I'm using a machine called MTL Gateway 01. It has a 500 gig drive installed on it for backup data. That's more than enough for this demo. You may need terabytes of data though for your entire process. So we download the gateway software onto this machine, and we're going to run the installer, which extracts it and then automatically runs it. And this is the software we described earlier that communicates up and down to the cloud for Metallic. It's a proxy, it's a gateway, it's a media agent, it's an all-in-one piece of software. Once the installer is done, you pick the drives that you want everything installed to. And this is, at this point, you're not configuring the location of where the backup data goes to. You're configuring where the software itself resides. You know, authenticate, you can use an auth code or you can use your credentials that you signed up for the trial in. Username and password's easier. After it authenticates, it phones home to the cloud. It'll do a small software update if it needs it. And then at that point, it'll be done. You can go back to the Metallic portal, hit the refresh button, and you should see your gateway appear there. And there we go. Now we need to configure this policy for Hyper-V for Azure Stack HCI with local storage. At this point, this is where you configure for the first time the actual disk location you want the data to go to. So I had that M drive that you saw before that had like 500 gigs. We're picking it as the backup location. You will be prompted next if you want to do any backups to the cloud itself using MCSS storage. Like we talked about earlier, we're not going to worry about that for the sake of this demonstration. You need to make a plan. A plan is what contains your retention policy and how frequently things are backed up. In this case, I'm just doing the default top choice 1 month retention plan because this is just to do a migration. Call it whatever you want. I think I picked I called it 1 month retention or MTL GW 1 month retention. Finally, you can configure the hypervisor. So you have to give the FQDN of the hypervisor. So this is our Azure Stack HCI node name, display name, FQDN. And then you need to give credentials. I believe it needs to be a domain administrator or at least a local administrator on the machine. It doesn't need to be a domain admin. It just needs to be a local admin on the box. I already had, for the sake of this demo, pre-populated credentials in here. You can click the plus button and you can add in something there if you want. This is now where it's going to ask you to install the software on the actual HCI node itself, because at this point the VSA agent is installed. So we copy that URL from that button, we download it on the Azure Stack HCI node itself. You can download it to a jump box and run it remotely on an SMB share if you want, but again, for my lab, this is what we're doing. We will run the file. It extracts everything again. It's like 500 meg, dumps it all to program files, Metallic folder called installer. Let's actually go check it out. Yeah, there you go. So at this point, since we're running Windows Server Core, we can't just run setup.exe and let it do its thing. We actually, in the documentation for Metallic, they give you this command line option to run where it scrapes, pre-generates an XML file with a bunch of configs in it and asks you for an authentication code. Again, there's no interactive UI for Windows Server Core, so we need to go into the Metallic portal real quick, go to the company section. There is something called an authentication code sitting in there. The auth code is basically like a one-time password. You can regenerate it on demand. Very useful if you're doing like bulk automated deployments. It's right here. Requires auth code for authentication. We click that, it copies it in the clipboard. You can hit the little refresh button if you want to regenerate it. So we'll go back to our HCI node, we paste it in. We're going to copy this, and we're just going to run this from the command line. And now this is where the magic happens. This is automatically going to set up our entire Azure Stack HCI node or nodes. You will be doing this on multiple nodes if you have multiple nodes. And it's running it silently in the background. We'll go to the task manager and demonstrate it. There's our setup running, Commvault setup. At this point, no services have been installed. Oh, it looks like actually a few are. So 3 get installed really quickly. I think I can tail the logs. Yep, there we go. So it already had installed most of its stuff, and it's at this point it's just waiting for the ComServe in the cloud, the thing that orchestrates the backup jobs to finish its registration. We'll see that jump in a second. It looks like it finished installing. If we hop over to Task Manager, we should see the services are now installed. Yep, there's all like 5 of them. They're all running. Setup.exe is done. Again, if you were using a GUI Hyper-V OS, the setup is interactive and it'll tell you it's done. But this is just a quick and convenient way to kind of monitor it as we're installing it on Azure Stack HCI or Windows Server Core. So now we flip back to the command center, the web GUI, we hit Discover Nodes, and we will be prompted, I believe, with a list of all of the nodes that have been installed. So if you had done this on multiple, you would see multiple here. Again, single node cluster for our demo. We're just going to pick the node 1, put a check in it, hit next. It'll ask us to configure a VM group, which is just the default group is literally every VM on the node or on the cluster, in this case the cluster. So we're just going to call it by its name. You don't want to just call it like VM group. Try to give it a name that maybe has like the cluster node, or if you want to get really neurotic, you can type in whatever you want. Again, though, this is for migrating from VMware to HCI. So like at this point, we're just configuring the HCI node so it's in the system. Yes, this will by default do backups of the HCI node as configured, but we can always go back and configure filters later, or just tell it not to back up the HCI node, because again, we're really just doing this to migrate off of VMware. I hit the preview button there to demonstrate that the connectivity is working. I had a couple of demo VMs that were on HCI. We saw all 3 of them show up. We're going to click through, hit finish, and at this point, HCI is done. That is, it looks like we banged that out in about a little more than 5 minutes. So not too shabby. At this point, we need to get VMware configured. So we're going to go back to the Protect VMs virtualization tab. Same steps, except this time we're picking VMware. We already have our gateway configured, so it shows up in the dropdown. We already have our storage configured, so we click that. We don't need cloud storage. We already have a plan configured. If for whatever reason it doesn't show up, just configure another one. You can reuse them amongst virtualization clients, Hyper-V or VMware if you want. For some reason mine didn't show up again, so I just made another one. Now we need to configure VMware by getting the FQDN of vCenter. I called them both the same. Configure a account. In this case, I'm just going to use my login I used for Hyper-V, because I already had vCenter configured to use that login as an administrator. You can configure custom RBAC in vCenter just for Metallic backups, and the Metallic documentation goes into it pretty extensively. Again, for the sake of this demo, I'm just trying to show how you could do a migration. You can have a service account if you want to use that. Doesn't really matter. Very similar to the Hyper-V stuff. we need to make a VM group, which is a representation of all the stuff we actually want to back up. In this case, the default will be everything on VMware. So again, call it by a unique name. I typed in just kind of what the vCenter server name is and suffixed it with VM group there. I'll hit preview to make sure we can see everything. Yep, there they all are. If you have multiple ESX servers in your data center registered in vCenter, they would all show up there. For the sake of this demo, I only have one, but you saw the VMs, you saw the VM templates. Awesome. So boom, 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 super quick. We now have two VM groups. We have the Hyper-V one and we have the vCenter one. So we need to kick off a backup for the first time on VMware. Just doesn't matter what you pick. It's always going to do a full one the first time, even though incremental is the default option. It's smart enough to do a full. And the job will start. We'll see this jump in a second. There we go. As it begins to talk to the vCenter APIs and then tell ESX to start actually backing things up. I'm going to flip over back to the media agent now. You can see we have a couple folders on that M drive for backup data, for deduplication, and for indexing. Those can be all locations that you custom configure. Again, I only plan on having a couple hundred gigabytes, maybe at most, backed up for this migration. But it's very flexible. You can have multiple drives configured for each agent. You can see the backup's running already. My interface is only 1 gig on both VMware and this Metallic gateway, so it's pegged. It's pegged at just about a gig. My disk is being written to pretty hard. 90 to 100 megabytes per second is about a gigabit. It will stream it out as fast as possible. Right, let's jump ahead a little bit here just to save everyone time. My backup's done. You can see all the VMs completed successfully. All the bottom job was the actual VM group, and then the individual VMs are listed there. We now see all the VMs listed in Metallic as backed up. SLA met means that the most recent backup job completed. Let's restore one. Let's go in and show how this works. Kind of hidden in the bowels and magic juju of Metallic and Commvault is the ability to convert these things by simply just picking a different restore location. So we're going to grab a VM that's been backed up on VMware. In this case, I only have one recovery point because I've only done one backup, but if you've had this running for a couple days, you may have multiple there. And we're going to go into it. You have a lot of options here. We're just going to do full virtual machine. These other things are pretty handy if you're worried about DR scenarios, but again, for the sake of this, we're just trying to migrate. And full disclosure, you don't need to do this one VM at a time. You can pick 10 VMs at a time and kind of kick them all off at once, but I'm just going to do one here. You're going to go to add a place restore. You're going to pick Hyper-V. It'll show you all available locations. Again, single node, my environment, so I'm only going to pick that one. You have the ability to convert it to a thin provision disk if it wasn't a thin provision disk. I believe auto will just pick whatever it previously was backed up as. You have to specify a destination path. Since this is HCI and it's got clustered S2D storage, we're going to drop it on my S2D volume that I have for VMs. Make sure you specify a folder for the VM if you organize your stuff that way. If you just drop it in the root, it's just going to put the VHDX files kind of all there, which is fine, but I use VMM for everything. I like the way it works. Connect it to the VM adapter, register the VM with failover cluster so it actually shows up in the cluster, not just in Hyper-V. Kick off your job, and let's go check how this is going. So now I'm on my HCI node. Wow, you can see this thing's hauling. It's, again, saturating it at over a gigabit per second, probably because the Metallic VM with the backup data is on the same vSwitch as my hypervisor itself. Let's CD over to my cluster storage. You can see my restore is taking place. So that is a VHDX that was not a VHDX. That was a VMDK file represented by Metallic, or I should say backed up by Metallic. And the magic of Commvault is restoring it as a VHDX file. It was a very small VM, so this backup's already done, especially moving that quick. We're going to start the VM up. You could do this from FCM if you have a jump box or Windows Admin Center or VMM. I'm already on this host, so I'm just going to type it in manually here. If I can even remember how to type, oh my goodness. Let's see if I can try this again. I'm trying to autocomplete the name like a dummy. Start VM, name. The name is WS 2022. Come on, there we go. And my VM should be running now. If I just get VM, there it is, it's already up. And just to demonstrate that it's booting, let's flip over to my jump box, and yep, it's already up and running. And let's log into it. And I'm going to show you that this really did come from a VMware environment. You'll see the VMware tools installed. Even though now it's running on HCI, it's running on Hyper-V. So I strongly recommend once you batch and get all these things configured. Yeah, see, there's VMware tools. This should be uninstalled. So whether you do that through group policy or you run a postscript at the end of your restore, or you just keep a manual checklist. It's harmless that it's on there, but it's just kind of unnecessary. And here you go. So you can even see even Metallic took care of the HCL of everything, and the magic of Windows Server and Hyper-V kind of installs and recognizes the integration tools that it needs. So I mentioned earlier, if you want to do a restore, you can go into the VM group. If you want to do a restore of multiple machines all at one time. So let's say you had 20 you wanted to just restore at once. You would go to the VM group, and you can just, again, pick the most recent time. In this case, I only have one. Go to restore, and you'll see on the right blade that instead of it being just a single VM listed there, you're going to see however many were backed up. That whether you put a check in all of them or you just pick maybe 2 or 3, it will show you a aggregate list of everything you selected. There you go. So I have a Rocky Linux VM and another Windows Server VM, and it's smart enough to say, hey, you want to install this out of place? Hey, you want the settings to be for all of them? Go ahead. I tend to go through each one to make sure they're in a different folder, but you can obviously do storage migrations later to take care of that if you want. Connect to your network adapter, register with failover clustering, bing, bang, boom, you're done.